If you look through the 1900 Pokemon cards in Standard right now, you'll notice several blasts from the past. Ultra Ball, Master Ball, Scoop Up Cyclone, Tool Scrapper, Sacred Ash, Crushing Hammer, Air Balloon, Counter Gain, and more are direct reprints of things we had back in the good old days when you could cough on a stranger and it wasn't a big deal. And for spiritual reprints, Meowth EX is just Lumineon V, which was just Tapu Lele GX, which was just Jirachi Uppercase EX. And Naveen is literally Sightseer with a different name. Not to mention N Zoroark EX's ability is the same as Zoroark GX's, and Dragapult EX is eerily similar to Dragapult VMAX. So clearly they aren't afraid to dip their toes into the same mouth, as Albert Einstein used to say all the time before discovering science. In today's video, I'll be looking at 10 cards from the past 30 years of the Pokemon TCG, highlighting which ones I think should come back in 2026 or 7. First up, if you look through the annals of history, almost every format in the modern era has been dominated by multi-prize decks, including our current one with Dragapult EX. While Hide and Sneak threatens to upset that balance, it's the exception, not the rulebox. Back in the Sun and Moon days, though, single prize decks had a great way to counter these behemoths in Shrine of Punishment. Plop this stadium down, and between turns, every Pokemon GX took a damage counter to the face. The closest comparable in today's format is Frostlass, except Frostlass is a stage 1 that can be picked off as a snow run since you can't really run Shaman or Battle Cage. And let's not forget that several top-tier multi-prizers in 2026 don't have abilities. Now, I understand every deck is running multiple stadiums in this day and age like Area Zero and Jamming Tower, which removes Shrine from play. But think of how shiny my feet are after lotioning them. Also, think of how much fun it'll be to see their Fez, Meowth, and Latias take damage every time you end your turn, forcing your opponent to scramble like an Execute to find a way to stop you from punishing them harder than what I usually have to pay Mistress Paddlebottom extra for. Simply because of how much it would level the playing field for every single prize deck out there, Shrine of Punishment is my #1 pick for a card that needs to return. Unless you're facing Dragapult, because then you're just strengthening their Monkey Dory, forcing you to run Patrat, which in turn gives them an easy prize. As much as I want to rant about how they haven't listened to our feedback and given us a game mode in live where we draw 13 at the start of the game, then choose our 6 prizes, I'll put my foot in my mouth for now. Instead, I'll just mention how prizing is the biggest negative about the Pokemon TCG, especially when you go to play Grimmsnarl for the first time in 6 months and all 3 of your hairy fairies are prized, forcing a concede. Anyway, one way to alleviate problems produced by 10% of your deck being taken away at the start of a game, potentially hindering any setup, is by having a 5th copy of your basics. Something that I personally believe should be an evergreen card that never leaves Standard, sort of like what we're seeing with Boss's Orders and Ultra Ball, is Ditto Prism Star from Sun and Moon Lost Thunder. If you're unfamiliar, Prism Star cards were limited to 1 copy per card per deck. They're slightly different from Ace Specs, as those are limited to 1 total. Before you say anything, yes, I understand this would make Dragapult better, essentially giving them a 5th Dreepy. And even adding a new rule where Ditto can't evolve into something with a rule box wouldn't stop that either. But Ditto's ability to evolve into any stage 1 is extremely useful. In Thwackey Dipplin, you could evolve Ditto into either Thwackey, Dipplin, Rabsca, or Seaking, giving you a ton of flexibility. Remaining under the assumption that you can't evolve Ditto into an EX, it'd also be great for opening several new tech options. Now you could forego Psyduck and run Golduck instead, as well as Rabsca, without worrying about their pre-evos. Or if you want to add a little bit of card draw, Ditto could turn into a Dunsparce or Ionos Kilowattrel, not worrying about Dunsparce or Wattrel. Best of all, because it's a Prism Star, Ditto is super balanced. If for any reason it would be sent to the discard pile, Ditto instead goes to the Lost Zone, never to be used again. I know Prisms were a year-long special mechanic and bringing them back today wouldn't really make sense, but I think reprinting Ditto would make dollars. Sticking with the theme of pilot-hating prizing, there's Hisuian Heavy Ball. When Heavy Ball came out, interacting with your prize cards wasn't something one simply did. The few examples that come to mind are Town Map, which flipped them over, Gladion, which was a supporter that swapped 1 prize with Gladion, and Peonia, another supporter that let you potentially exchange 3 prizes with 3 cards in your hand. The only real item-based way we had to take a card out of the prizes was with Mr. Beast Ball. Except it only worked on Ultra Beasts and there weren't a ton of good ones, so it never really saw play. Well, the designers took that concept of Beast Ball and applied it to all basics in your prizes, creating a card that saved everybody's bacon, especially if you were playing an Emboar deck. Play with your balls heavily, and if there was a basic Pokemon in your prizes, you could put it directly into your hand, replacing that prize with Heavy Ball. It was a simple yet powerful effect that every deck benefited from, lessening the potential of RNG ruining your life. Looking at Heavy Ball in terms of today's format, think of how many times you've watched me prize Lily's Clefairy in a Psychic deck against Dragapult. Or how often I'll face Terra, Greninja, or Mega Starmie and oops, Shaman's prized. Or someone who gets 3 Duskull down turn 1 and uh-oh, Psyduck's got too big of a headache and called in sick and we don't have anyone who can fill a shift, so we're going to be short-staffed, and when we try to tell the customers why things are taking longer than normal, that only makes them angrier. Also, it can be found with Petrol, adding more layers of strategery to the game, forcing you to decide if a Heavy Ball for a basic turn 1 is better than something like Ultra Ball. I would argue that maybe Heavy Ball should be limited to single prizers since it unfavorably rewards EX heavy decks, but it's a trade-off I'm willing to make. Oh, and for anyone who might suggest that Redeemable Ticket is a suitable replacement, that idea is irredeemably bad. Pretty much the entirety of the Pokemon franchise is built upon the notion that playing with your balls in public is perfectly acceptable. That's why things like Ultra Ball and Quick Ball have been so powerful in the past. But if you were to ask me what the most balanced search card ever is, that'd be Pokemon Communication, which dates all the way back to the Heart Gold and Soul Silver era. Way better than that stupid parent supporter nobody's ever used because it's terrible. Pokécom allows you to swap any Pokemon in your hand with any Pokemon in your deck. To me, it's the Goldilocks of search. Not too strong that it's broken and everyone needs 4 copies, since it does require you to have a Pokemon in your hand. Yet it's powerful enough to turn a useless Dragapult into a Badoo turn 1 that you can retreat into and item lock your opponent, preventing them from playing the game. Yes, I know that almost every suggestion in this video would help Dragapult. Just go with it, okay? What I find particularly annoying about the lack of Pokécom in our game is that the damn thing exists in TCG Pocket. Yet we haven't seen it since Team Up in 2019. I know 2026 is a half year for the main game since they had to stretch the Mega Evolution era into 2 years instead of 1 because Winds and Waves likely got delayed from late 2026 to sometime in 2027. But it still stings like stepping on a Beedrill's rotund bum. When Reversal Energy rotated out of Standard earlier this year, it removed the playability of several single prize decks. I looked for maybe 30 seconds and found 6 different decks right now that would benefit mightily from an energy that counts as 3 of every energy if you're behind on prizes. The same principle holds true for counter energy from the Sun and Moon days, except where reversal is 3 of any energy on single prize evolutions only, counter energy works on any single prizer but is just 2 of any energy. Also, counter energy is likely the reason why cards these days now specify rule box instead of GX or uppercase EX or whatever, because in expanded, counter energy can be used on Vs and lowercase EXs, which is broken. Currently, the only energy we have in standard that can really help evolution decks is Ignition. Except unless your name's Doublade, there aren't many single prizers who can actually take advantage of this since Ignition is 3 colorless. And the damn thing gets discarded at the end of your turn. Worst of all, since we don't have those 4 reversals to go along with 4 Ignition, you have to find alternate ways of putting multiple energy on a single prizer, which has resulted in so many semi-viable Pokemon doing absolutely nothing this year. I was hoping it'd be some astronomical number to back up my point, but if you search for how many of our 1900 cards in Standard involve a coin flip, over 250 results appear. Even I can figure out that that's more than 10%. Yet unless your name's Crushing Hammer, no one really takes advantage of this mechanic. Why take a 50-50 chance on Larry's to Dunsparce and rely on luck when you could just play Dragapult and guarantee you win simply by having Forge or Cloak down turn 2? And before you say anything, no, Backtrack Badge isn't enough to change things. That only works on colorless Pokemon. What we need is the return of Glimwood Tangle. Put this stadium in play, now you can reflip for any attack. This way a nullifying 0 that flips 0 heads is given a second chance. Or if none of your ruffians attack the first time, they can try again. I personally think Glimwood Tangle is more balanced than Victini. That being said, it would be another bench sitter in a world where we already need Psyduck and Shaman and Patrat and Fezandipity. Still, with a stadium-based reflip card, your opponent has a chance to use it too, or they can easily bump it. For a quick history lesson that I might have made up, if you're wondering why so many cards flip coins, I believe the rationale by the Pokemon Company is that they allow anyone of any skill level to play the game. Though if you knew what you were doing on the Game Boy version of the Pokemon TCG, you could manipulate the flips in your favor. A feature they removed from TCG Pocket, despite what you may think. This one's a little unexpected. But given how some of the most successful Dragapult lists have adopted Crushing Hammer like it's a cute dog that'll get millions of followers on TikTok while also distracting from your lack of personality, it fits. If Hoothoot's in play, basic energy attached to your bench Pokemon can't be discarded by items or supporters. That would mean the energy you thought was safe on your bench to end Zorua you gave before ending your first turn would actually be safe when the Dragapult player lilies into 4 hammers. Considering that Crushing Hammer was just given a J-Block reprint, meaning it's going to remain standard legal until at least March 2029, we need this effect back in the game. Going to Hooters wasn't really a thing back in the day, but that's because we didn't have Dragapult EX. Similar to Fliptini, I know another bench sitter like Hoothoot is another one too many when you already need Psyduck, Shaman, and Patrat in most decks to survive. But this video is all about options and forcing deck building to be another skill taking you to victory, not just believing in the heart of the cards. Because when new sets are only giving us 80-ish new cards, yet the power level hasn't compensated for it, well, it's no wonder a card from 2024 is dominating in 2026. On January 17th, 2025, the Pokemon Company released a little-known card called Badoo. For 0 energy, this dealt 10 damage and prevented your opponent from playing items during their next turn, which basically meant a third of the cards in your deck were useless. Clearly, they don't believe this to be a problem, as they haven't bothered to give us Channeler or Pokemon Ranger back in Standard. While no one really ever used Channeler because the format at that time didn't have a greater menace than Spider-Man, Pokemon Ranger was heavily played back in the day. Namely due to, you guessed it, another item locker. Seismitoad EX was the original annoying card, except this guy dealt 30 damage for a double colorless energy, which is something that definitely shouldn't return. There were, and still are, several ways to boost Seismitoad's damage well beyond 30 and expanded, but the item locking was key. To combat that, you could use Pokemon Ranger, which removed all effects of attacks on both you and your Pokemon. This added another layer of strategy to the game because it forced you to potentially hold onto your Jirachi EX for a turn. So naturally, we don't have a card like this in Standard. And considering that Badoo and Dragapult and every other H-Block card rotates in March 2027, even if they do give us one in Delta Rain, our November set, it'll be too late. I also think canceling Kalagan should return, but in supporter form. As an item, it's too strong, shutting off the ability of your opponent's active. If they did a straight reprint, it would be abused in Dragapult Dusknoir to bypass Psyduck, bossing and coloning in the same turn. But Channeler and Pokemon Ranger and canceling Cologne all essentially give the Pokemon Company a failsafe in case they print a card that's too strong and disrupts the entire meta, making the game less fun for everybody. Normally, when I make these types of videos, I just pull things out of my butt, like that time I went to the doctor to have a hamster removed. For this next part, I had to do a slight amount of research. In August 2019, Guzma rotated out of Standard. In May 2020, Boss's Orders was released, which was the worst thing to happen in the world at that time. During those 9 months, we lived in a perfect world where the words Guzma for game and Boss for game were never spoken. Instead, we had to rely on Custom Catcher and Great Catcher and Pokemon Catcher to bring up one of our opponent's Pokemon, which all had drawbacks. Pokemon Catcher was a coin flip, Great Catcher required you to discard 2 cards and only worked on GXs, and Custom Catcher required you to play 2 copies at once. And that's exactly what I want to see back in Standard. Remove supporter-based gust and bring back item-based gust like Custom Catcher that's limited to a max of 2 per game. It slows the battles down, and similar to several other cards in this video, adds more strategy to the TCG. For Custom Catcher specifically, it had a great first effect, drawing you up to 3 cards, potentially preventing a precarious start. But if you did that, there'd only be 3 copies left in deck, meaning you had just 1 Gust left. You kids these days will never know the whole glory of being able to attach an energy to a weak basic on the bench, end your turn, and not really worry about it getting knocked out. Obviously, Great Catcher for game on a Dedenne GX still existed, but it at least required some effort and could be bypassed by simply not playing EXs. In the Sword and Shield era, we also received Cross Switcher. This was another card that required you to play 2 copies at once, offering up a Guzma effect. Custom Catcher is still my preferred option though, since you could still play 1 copy and have something happen. Oh, and way back in the day there was something called Mega Catcher. I think it should come back with Great Catcher's discard 2 effect. Because when Mega Catcher was originally standard legal, Megas kinda sucked. Whereas today's can simply be put into play if they're a basic or evolve from a single prizer, Megas in the olden days had to evolve from an uppercase EX. And if they didn't have a Spirit Link attached, your turn ended. Yeah, if you were ever wondering why there was so much vitriol from cranky old boomers like me when this new wave of Megas was announced, it's because we had to jump through so many hoopas back in the day. Anyway, bring back Custom Catcher and remove Boss's Orders. Which can't happen until at least May 2028 since it was just reprinted in Mega Evolution base set. Before you pass out due to anger, which would actually be a good thing for my watch time, no, I'm not suggesting we bring back Parallel City. What I want is simply the return of dual stadiums. For an embarrassingly short amount of time during the XY era, we were given stadium cards that could be flipped around like your 3DS when trying to evolve an Inkay. Only 3 were ever made, with Parallel City being by far the best. It had nothing to do with the damage reduction though, and less to do with limiting your opponent's bench to 3 Pokemon. No, it was used to beat yourself off. Before getting banned due to its insanity, Shaman EX could be played as many times as you wanted each turn, drawing you up to 6. Plop down Parallel City with the seemingly negative side facing you, 2 Shaman could be cleared off. Or if you went Skyfield into Parallel City, all of them could be removed. That's obviously way too powerful, where at least the Area 0 Chen Pao combo we see in Standard requires work. As for Chaos Tower, it didn't live up to the name. It merely prevented certain status conditions depending on which way it was turned. We literally have that in Standard right now with Festival Grounds that blocks everything. Reverse Valley at least tried something interesting, either reducing damage to metal types or increasing damage dealt by dark types. Except it was an abysmal 10 either way. Now, I understand this is asking a lot, because I don't know if you know this, but when you factor in Fossil Quarry coming in Pitch Black, there's just 31 Stadium cards in Standard. That means less than 2% of cards in Standard are Stadiums. To be fair, most of them are useful in their own way. Still, think of how cool it would have been if they combined both Calamitous Stadiums into one. One side would increase the retreat cost, while the other could damage non-water types upon energy attachment. Obviously, these examples aren't perfect, but what about Community Center and Practice Studio? One side gets to heal a little bit, while the other deals a bit of extra damage. And I think a combo of Academy at Night and Primordial Altar would have gone hard, like me watching a For the Win video. There's so much untapped potential with dual stadiums that could open up a whole new world of fun. But then you remember that not even 2% of cards are stadiums and realize that they clearly don't view this mechanic as a priority. As I was researching for this video like a professor, I found dozens of cards I wanted to see again in Standard. Unfortunately, I'm out of time, which is a card you might be surprised is still legal. That being said, I wanted to highlight Energy Lotto, which is a Pokegear for all types of energy. Additionally, there's Worker, who discards a pesky stadium while also drawing 3, and Professor Kukui, who got the short end of the stick at the time but could be useful now, drawing 2 and boosting damage. And how could I make a video about reprints without mentioning Random Receiver? I've wanted this back for years. Play it and you're given whichever supporter is at the top of your deck. Yes, Stall and Control decks can use it for Dastardly Deeds. And yes, it creates a really boring environment IRL where you slowly flip over each card one by one. But I'm tired of failing Pokegear, and Tatsugiri is much better as Sushi. Regardless of what it is, at least you're guaranteed something with Random Receiver. Elsewhere, Roadblock Sudowoodo is a way to lock someone's bench, while Unit Energy and Blend Energy could be designed in such a way that they open up new possibilities for multi-type decks. Until you remember that Dragons would probably use them the most. When the Dunsparce rotates out of Standard in March alongside Dracloak, we're going to need single prize ways to draw cards. Both Octillery and Babarrel have shown that the drop to 5 ability is balanced and strong. I also wouldn't hate another baby Pokemon like Cleffa that refills your hand, or a Alolan Vulpix who can find any 2 Pokemon. They just have to make sure Beacon is limited to 2 non-rule boxers or 1 rule boxer. Raihan's one of the strongest, most balanced supporters ever. It's a dead card until one of your Pokemon's knocked out. But when they are, you can accelerate a basic energy from the discard pile while simultaneously grabbing any card from deck. I also wouldn't hate to see the return of Rotom V, which drew 3 cards at the cost of ending your turn. Though only in a world where stall decks don't exist. Basically, there's a ton of cards that could come back today and immediately improve the game. I provided a bunch of examples, but what would you like to see return? And please everyone, don't comment Butthole Bonsly. I mean competitive cards, not ones that are fun to look at and make me feel funny in my no-no zone.